Hello.
Greetings.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening to everybody who is watching along on this beautiful evening here on Wednesday evening. And hello to those future people watching at a different time. Thank you all for tuning in wherever and whenever you do. Welcome to our 7th episode of Access Loves Theatre, a conversation all about the joys of going to see theatre and other live performance. If you are watching live on Facebook this evening, please feel free to drop us a comment or a question into the chat, and Katie will pass these on to us. If you're watching in the future, also drop a chat and we'll check in and maybe we can answer it at a future date. I'm really delighted to have the 3 guests that we have this evening with us. First of all, we have Allison Martin, who is a writer and theatre maker. And you are currently in Wexford Town, in County Wexford, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm from Dublin originally, but I'm living in Wexford now.
Whereabouts in Dublin are you from?
I'm from Blanchardstown, but I lived around Albert College as well, and Beaumont, and yeah, very near Axis.
Lovely, lovely. So not too far. I'm in Whitehall, so just probably up the road from
yeah, just up the road.
Yeah, lovely stuff. Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we have Dr. Tanya Deen, who is a freelance dramaturg and program chair for the BA in Drama Performance at TU Dublin Conservatoire. And Tanya, in your blazingly lit, beautiful square there, you are in Dublin at the minute, right?
I am. I and my white square are in Dublin 7.
Wonderful, wonderful. And am I correct bringing the south side to us, Morgan?
Yes, southwest. Morgan is beaming in from Ballyfermot.
Brilliant, brilliant. So Morgan at Ballyfermot is an actor, musician, and head of singing at the Lear. And I was going to observe that the 3 of ye have all got many strings to your bow, but actually thinking back, that tends to be the case with theatre artists working today. So most of the guests have had many disciplines that they're bringing in, but we might well see a number of those different perspectives coming into play this evening. Before we got started this evening, I said to Alison that we are going to start with one of the plays that she mentioned to me before when we were chatting ahead of tonight's broadcast. And that is a dance piece called L'après-midi d'un faune, which was in 2014 in the Dublin Dance Festival.
Yeah, 2014. I think Maria Fleming programmed it at the Arc, and yeah, like I suppose the images for it caught my eye when I was looking through the program, and this was before the time I had kids myself, so I hadn't really gone to the Arc much, into 1 or 2 things. But I booked myself a ticket one day. I was off work and went in, and it just really it just blew me away. You know, as a dance piece, it was just, as you can see there, like the plastic bodies. It was just so well choreographed. It was beautiful. It was really beautiful and magical, and yeah, it was quite amazing, really. And like the Arc, really, you know, the way sometimes a venue just really matches a show, and like because of the low level seating in the Arc, it was really, you know, you felt you were surrounded by it. It was great.
Wow. Yeah, it's and I remember reading some of the blurbs about the piece, and it said something like, be ready to watch a room full of ballerinas all made of plastic bags. And it's beautiful to think, I mean, there's no reason this wouldn't be in the dance festival, but it's
Yeah.
to me, and you tell me, Alison, it seems as if it is indeed that the dancers are not human.
Oh yeah. Like there was no humans involved. Like, well, bar the creation. You know, all the dance moves were done by the plastic, you know.
That is just, it's extraordinary. And so
Yeah, like the performers were very much to you know, to the background of the action, you know.
Yeah.
Were they puppeteering?
No, it was they had like a bank of wind machines.
Mm-hmm.
So they were changing the wind machines so that like the bodies would dance in certain ways, and then you like using the umbrella, as you can see there, and it looked as if, say, the dancers were jumping into the umbrella. It was really well done. So like, yeah, like, so the performers were very much like the supporting artists, you know, just really sort of guiding everything along. But and although that, you know, the wind machines were being changed around and that, because the dance was so beautiful, it wasn't distracting in any way to have that sort of, to have the presence of things being moved on stage, you know, the way sometimes it can be, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it was just really gorgeous and really unexpected. Like, it reminded me of, you know, there's a little piece in American Beauty where you see the plastic bag, and it was the same, I suppose, the same concept, but this was just like phenomenal. You know, it really was phenomenal. Yeah, it was really, really beautiful. Like, yeah, and just like so well done. And like, I was actually reflecting on it last night. I was thinking like, and the, like, I wonder, because, you know, with the use of plastic now, would it get the same sort of reception, or would there be resistance? Or, you know, at the time I didn't think of like the use of plastic as a material. But yeah, it was funny, like, after I saw it, I forgot the name of it, and I've been thinking about it for years. It would pop into my head, and then last year I was doing an online incubator and in Garter Lane, and Maria Fleming was giving a talk, and that was one of the pieces like she used to show like her time at the Arc. I was like, at least I know the name now, you know. I may still not be able to pronounce it properly, but at least I know it.
I can't get over these bodies. They're so evocative. They're just plastic bags.
Mm.
They look like little floating kind of frozen chickens, don't they?
The pink one looks particularly active, like the pink one's kind of in charge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did they use what music did they use? Was it the Debussy, do you know? And was it based on the sort of...
Yeah, I can't remember now what music they used. Now it was lovely, all right, but I can't remember what piece it was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so struck by, you know, these human performers or facilitators or whatever they are. You know, there's such specific facial work that they're doing, and it's all about giving focus, isn't it? You think about, you know, acting classes and different kind of work that actors do, and the way in which each time you see one of their faces, they're so specifically showing the audience where to look, and their bodies too. It's really fascinating. And do you remember what was happening in this moment of the performance?
I don't actually remember that moment from it. No, I don't remember that piece.
It's marvelous.
But like the finale, like it was really sort of like emotional or something. Like, it was really, yeah, it was really, really emotional because it was so beautiful, and just the way the dancers all came together, you know, it was just spot on. Like,
that's
yeah,
so beautiful.
It is really beautiful. It's amazing how powerful theatre for young audiences can be by sort of taking out shock or taking out trendy gimmicks or fashionable phrases. It has to just engage directly with the soul of the viewer, or they're going to start just wandering around.
Yeah.
Very honest audiences.
Oh, the most. They are cutthroat. Yeah. If they don't like it, you're going to know all about it.
And Morgan, you've done a fair bit of work in theatre for young audiences, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I worked a lot with Branner. So through the school program where we would just go as TIE people and set up in the school halls, through to when the Arts Council started to pay attention and we were getting festivals and we were getting into Barbaro. So I've done many years of that. And then Moonfish started, one of my first shows with Moonfish, I think it was my second show, was an adaptation of Pinocchio, which was trying to address theatre for teenagers. Because most of the teenage theatre that we see these days is pretty much, issue based. So it was, we just felt that there was a huge hole in the theatre for teenage audiences. So you lose people. Oh, well done. There's Grace, who several times in the pub after the show would be told how cool the guy playing Pinocchio was. And it was really anarchic, that show. It was all of the set and everything was just found. It was paper bags. It was fabricated by us. Yeah, it was a no budget set, which created a really strong aesthetic of its own. Lots of make and do after rehearsals.
And again, such an element of children's or young people's theatre, right? Is
exactly, you can make a jellyfish out of a paper bag. Yeah.
And Morgan, that's one of the things that you mentioned in general when I was asking you about what you had in your mind for this conversation, was the work that's seen at Barbaro. And maybe for folks who don't know about Barbaro, you might say a word or two about
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd just love to say that it was such a great question, because it reminded me how amazing theatre can be. That you go, that piece that I saw 15 years ago is still in my mind. Like, that's such a seminal question that you go, okay, a piece of theatre that marked you, and you're like, well, I was 18 and I saw Footsbarn. I could go on for an hour about that, and I didn't even mention them. But to go back to Barbaro, Barbaro is the National Children's Theatre Festival. It used to be part of the Galway Arts Festival, and then it got its own slot in October. And I was lucky enough to be part of it a number of years, both with Branner and with Moonfish. But some of the most amazing pieces I've ever seen were in Barbaro. They were, so there was a piece called The Man Who Planted Trees, which was an English company, and they based it on a French short story by Jean Giono. And in fact, the story itself was controversial, because Giono had been asked to write about the person he knew who marked him most, and he invented a fictitious character in the Reader's Digest. But the story has actually been done in real life. So it was about wastes of land in the south of France where nothing grew except lavender. So you had these two guys on stage. One of them was puppeteering a dog. And it was kind of like the dog in Up. He spoke very much with the mindset and the intellect of a dog, observing things. And so when we were told about lavender, suddenly the whole theatre was full of the smell of lavender. It was extraordinary. Brilliant. And yeah, so basically the man finds the dog and they become friends, and they basically go around and plant trees. I'm actually getting really emotional thinking about it. So they basically inhabit and create employment and industry and help the planet by planting all these trees. And at the end, the dog dies. Oh. It's devastating.
No.
Yeah, because they've been doing it for like 25 years, and the dog gets really old and he passes away. And so the old man ends up finishing telling the story. It's just an entire lifetime happens in 3/4 of an hour with kids going, yay, smell of lavender, and like just every emotional bunch was enormous, and you were completely carried along sensually as well as emotionally with the whole thing. It was just, and it was two guys messing. They were being real English, you know, like lads going, okay, well, we'll do this now. So they kept this really light touch going while they were just throwing masses of emotion at you and storytelling. It was stunning. And again, for young audiences, so they couldn't go down sort of huge concepts or conceits or get terribly philosophical. They had to stay in the present moment to keep the audience engaged, and they entirely did, and the better for it.
Yeah.
And then the great thing about being a member in Barbaro is that you kind of meet them, and they're these really ordinary guys who are going to pack it in the back of the car and go off to the next festival, you know. And yeah, there was a French guy called, I was talking to you earlier about Théâtre Vélo, who had a tin soldier falling in love with a rag doll or something. But when he went from night to day, he was like, it got dark. And the set, everybody was kind of sitting on the floor. Oh, you went in through a wardrobe.
Brilliant.
You went into the theatre space through a wardrobe, and there was these kind of big white, sort of mid-century, slightly industrial looking lamps. And he just, all this black paper went down and he went dark. And the lights would go dark as the dark literally fell on people. And it was kind of like the Master and Margarita, where it got there was a cat. It really was, every now and again he'd be like, he's totally doing the Master and Margarita here. And as you left, he sort of saw you out the wardrobe and shook hands with everybody, and especially the kids. This big kind of scarecrow-y guy. Go, yeah.
That is something that children's theatre just does so well, because it embraces it. So it's just that sense of wonderment, that moment of wow.
Yeah. And to hear kids going, wow, as well.
And it's interesting what you said there about, so you described that he said dark and then it went dark, right?
Yeah. And he had bits of black paper going what the dark was. So it literally fell on people. Darkness fell.
Ah.
It's that fascinating thing that, you know, when we make theatre, we talk about that first stretch. I always call it like the first 10 pages of a script, or the first 10 minutes of a play's action on the stage, of we're teaching the audience how to watch it.
Yeah, teaching them the language. So bringing them in through a wardrobe was a good touch.
Yeah, and this sort of very explicit conversation you can have with children in that process, because they're constantly saying, okay, we're playing this now, you're the robber and I'm the this, and so now we're going to do this. And it's really fed into the process of work that I've done since with other people, with Moonfish, for example. Like, it's very much about framing what we're going to show in an aesthetic, in a language, in something that people are going to go, okay, this is what this is, right? It's a gig, you know, it's a boat. We establish the way we're going to tell the story so that people are sort of involved in familiarizing themselves from the get-go. So like, okay, so, this is what it is. This is what it is. Great, I get it now. Because they're being fed a lot of information. In theatre, you're constantly being fed important information. Yes. And it's interesting, you mentioned Branner, and we had Mark from Branner on a couple of weeks ago in our conversation about Irish language theatre, which even as a title of itself is somewhat fraught. You know, it's theatre that works with the Irish language amongst many other vocabularies. But I suppose one of the brilliant things that came up in that conversation, and is being touched on here, is that language as a thing is not necessarily the primary vehicle of telling the story, nor need people have the same language in order to enjoy the same piece or perform it for a group of people. That doesn't have to have a common language there.
Morgan, I was going to say, I actually recently shared, just in that conversation, that idea about language and about kind of different languages on stage, about being an act of faith in an audience, that they will follow, that they don't need everything to be explicit, to be text, that things can be subtext, that they can they can piece things together, and that sometimes being part of the creation of a mystery is part of the joy, rather than having everything be explicit. And I was having a conversation with a director that I've worked with in New York about this, because he's working on a similar project with his company. And I said, there is a show you have to see if you're thinking about how language works as an act of faith. And I sent him the archival video for Star of the Sea.
Oh, wow.
And I got an email back from him saying, thank you so much for this. That was actually delightful. It reminded me why I love theatre.
Oh. Okay, I'm going to somehow get that clip off to the Minfish Girls. That's wonderful.
For the folks at home who don't know, Morgan was involved in that production. Alison actually mentioned it as one of her Star productions. So let's throw up the photos, which folks will have seen, because it was already mentioned in the Irish Language Theatre conversation, because it's so beloved and so wonderful. I will shut up now. Let's talk about Star of the Sea.
Well, we took it to America. And we were a bit scared that the audience would go, hang on, I don't understand these words, but they did, 100%. Because one of the things we worked out in the works in progress, because we developed it over a number of years, and one of the things that became very clear was you can't subtitle every word. And that gave it a whole load of magic, because like that was one of maybe 5 lines that the audience got, but they understood everything else because they were listening to patterns of speech and watching faces and body language. And it gave us so many opportunities, because the book itself is about writing. There's journalism, there's letters, there's threats written on doors. The way the written word is used is a huge part of the book. So different fonts, different speeds of writing, different grammars fed the narrative. So what you're seeing there is like, it would have been the way bits of paper are put together to leave a letter anonymous when it's a threat or a ransom demand, that sort of thing.
It was such a big piece. Oh, sorry.
Go on, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, like, it was such a big piece of work to adapt. Like when I saw Star of the Sea was going to be on, I was thinking, like I don't know how many pages it was, but probably 300 or something pages.
It's over
like
400, yeah.
Is it? Yeah, like it's dense, like text wise, isn't it? But like it was so well done, and I saw it in Untitled. And
oh wow, the first time.
Yeah, so it was like I think it was like the venue, everything was sort of clicked. There was a sort of an atmosphere, and it was very clever, like the use of sound and everything, and very effective, the way simple things were used in a really, really clever way.
Yeah, I mean the Stones.
That still sticks in my mind, like the Stones, like. Yeah,
it took me actually a long time to work it out, because I can be really titsy. But so we used the Stones as potatoes. There was a sort of a movement piece that established the drudge of subsisting off potatoes, and then as they disappeared, but also at the start of each scene, a stone would be put in the ground. So we built a little cairn at the very, very front downstage under a little spotlight. And we mentioned it, we gave it a name. So it was sort of the famine dead. And I never noticed, or at least not for a long time, during the interval, they would sort of quite quietly just add to the cairn. And one night I was like, oh my God, like we mentioned so many names. Like there's so many, and they were like, no, we stack it. It's okay. We make it look like a cairn. Which are those little producer things, those little stage manager tricks, because they're artists as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's such a good example of exactly that kind of thing that we talk about for children's theatre, that sense of wonderment, that sense of giving the audience a partial picture, because you have faith that their imagination is such a skilled designer and being co-creators.
The number of times that it was especially Mairead. Now, we don't have a director as such, but because Mairead wasn't acting, and she was very much the outside eye and had a huge part in the design along with Liam. The number of times it was said that they have to finish the picture. You can't give them everything. It's up to the audience to finish the picture. And it's such an important lesson. I mean, I heard Marina Carr say the same thing on the radio, and she was talking about Hecuba. She was saying she has to allow the actor to finish the writing, and then the audience has to finish. So she has to be sparse. She has to leave space for the actor to move around in and be her or himself or themselves. Yeah. And it's a huge part of creative art, I think, especially collaboratively. And when the audience is part of the collaboration, that's I think it's important that they're included. And yeah, the Moonfish kind of vibe is very often where we have to take something out to leave room for them.
It's something that it's not, I mean, I think it's talked about more now, but I think in a lot of creative conversations, it can be forgotten really easily. We think about delivering an object, a product to a bunch of paying consumers, sort of, leaving them out of the, inextricable relationship that they have with the piece of work, which only becomes that work in front of them, with them.
Yeah, crucial.
You know the phrase, the willing suspension of disbelief? This actually used to historically be part of anti-theatrical bias, this idea that theatre made people less intelligent because they were believing foolishly in fictions. But the original meaning of that phrase, I think it's from Coleridge, but it wasn't saying switch your head off to watch something fictional, believe that it's real. It's saying willing suspension of disbelief is rising to meet the offer that a performance gives to you, is being part of the creation of something rather than ingesting something unthinkingly. It is that painting in around the edges and adding the kind of magic of it by being a willing co-creator, not by being a kind of mindless consumer.
Yeah. That's really, really lovely. The sort of notion that I see what you're offering me as an actor, as a performer. I see that this is what you're creating. I'm buying into it. I'm going to add to it and contribute with my own imagination. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that is, yeah, lovely, lovely, lovely. And I wonder, I think this is very nicely, organically meandering through a number of the shows that you all mentioned before we started. And one that comes to mind now out of this conversation is, Tanya, your suggestion of The Wild Bride. So why not? Well, first I'll pull up the images. One of which
I'm gonna have a little munch while this, so I'm gonna mute.
Perfect. Work away.
Bon appetit.
Now, Tanya, I've put at the front a particularly personal image, which you could explain once I get them up there, which you sent on to me this afternoon. Let's go to that now.
Yeah, this is capturing some pretty naked fangirling over theatre. So I saw The Wild Bride from the Cornish company Knee High when I was living in the States when I was doing my doctorate. So I went into New York, to Brooklyn, to St. Anne's Warehouse, which is one of my favorite theaters. And I booked months in advance to see this. I was so excited. And I was sitting in the very front row, and I would see a lot of theatre. I'm in the very privileged position this year that I'm one of the judges for the Irish Times Theatre Awards, so I'm getting to see a lot of things. So, normally I see a lot of things. I approach it from a critical perspective. No, for this one, I was like a child at Panto. I was in the front row going, and just absolutely just enchanted by it. And right seconds before the end of the show, one of the performers ran up to me where I was sitting and just handed me an apple and said, "Thank you so much," and ran back. And I have no idea if this is something they do for every show, or if they saw my like gawping face in the front, or like, oh God, let's give her something. She's got an apple there. She'll have an apple. And I was just like, it's a fairy tale piece. So I was just, and I was seeing it with a friend of mine, Rachel Spencer-Hewitt, who's an actor. And because theatre is the smallest community in the world, of course, she knew people in the show. So we were hanging around afterwards so she could chat to some of the musicians. And the actor who'd given me the apple came up and joined us and was just very cool, like, hey. And I apparently turned to him and went, "You gave me an apple." And I got him to sign it. So very smooth there.
But
did you keep it?
I still have it here. 7 years later. And it was fitting because, so for, I think a few people have seen knee-high shows because they brought them over for festivals and things like this. The show did tour to the festivals here. They quite often work with fairy tales. So this is based on a folk tale called The Handless Maiden. And what I loved about this production of theirs in particular was that it had that sense of wonderment, of creating things and beauty on stage and trusting the audience to kind of add the magic. But there was a heart of darkness to it, that it wasn't an innocent show. There was always just that edge of feeling that there is an actual threat, that you are a little uncomfortable, but almost from a child's perspective. One of the plot line is that the devil is trying to steal a girl. And when we first see this, the girl is very young and innocent, is kind of like batting him away. But for the audience, there is that just edge of discomfort of a grown man next to a girl with this kind of rapacious look in his eye. And the show kept finding that edge of darkness that folk tales tend to have to them before they get sanitized for kind of publication purposes. And this show had extraordinary music, beautiful images, and just, for me, it was wonderment without being saccharine, and it was magical without being empty or without being kind of just sparkly with no substance. And it was something very special.
Looks very beautiful.
Mm.
Beautiful design. I think it's important that theatre, like, well, not all theatre per se, but you know, it can't be saccharine. It needs to have spice. I mean, I think the joy is in, we're making joy in the present moment despite how hard life can be, you know.
And what was those images show? I saw it 10 years ago when it was at the Dublin Theatre Festival in 2011. So I have a faint inkling memory of this. But could you tell people a little bit about how the ensemble functions? Because there's a cast, but they kind of serve different kinds of performative roles, right?
Yeah, and it's something, again, of the stuff that I've seen of knee-highs that tends to be a running theme, is that there's a strong musical element. There'll be kind of, this one used a kind of bluegrass band. I still have the soundtrack, and it's a bangers, as the kids do say. If any of my students are watching now, they're just going, oh God. Oh, she tried. So it has this core of music as as part of the storytelling kind of tools. And there is an ensemble cast who will tend to have like a role for which they are kind of iconic within the play, but they will share and move and change. And what was fascinating with The Wild Bride was it was tripartite casting. The title character of the bride, who's silent almost throughout, was played at first by an actress who looked very young, who, I was watching the episode of this, Aoife, where you talked about The Boys of Foley Street, and everyone said of Katrina Ennis, like, she was such perfect casting because she looks so young. But in this, so yeah, this on the left-hand side of the screen, the actress who played her in the first iteration just looked very youthful and innocent, which again added to that kind of sense of unease. Then the roles passed over to the actress in the middle, who played her more like a young woman who was kind of dealing with trauma and like pregnancy and childbirth. And then it was passed to this actress at the end who was slightly older again, and it was just seeing the character mature, both in the story and visually, and watching her kind of navigate a world that was full of kind of trauma and traps and a devil trying to catch her and lies. And they were just incredibly versatile characters and actors. And it was, again, it was seeing something being created in a way that wasn't literal, because it trusted the audience to find joy in that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's interesting when you talk about that darkness. And Morgan, you brought up the darkness of that sad ending with the people.
It was, yeah, and I thought in that particular show, it was incredibly brave to do that for children. I mean, a lot of parents would be quite censorious about what they showed their children, and to be sort of so attached to something so jolly and then to have it die. But I think it was a really important choice because it allowed the show to mark how much time was spent. And for a kid, you know, to sort of go, okay, so I'll be, you know, 5'8", or, you know, the age of my dad when those trees are fully grown. Like, it really did establish that this was a long-term project that this man undertook. And it sort of signified a life well spent. Beautiful. In so many ways. Like, it was a really brave but very, very justified dramatic choice. Yeah.
And in
I was just going to say that's something Super Power have spoken about before. Aoife, I think you had Shan on at one stage. Like, sometimes as adults that we can sort of presume, younger people aren't going to be able to take on board a particular topic or theme, but they're, you know, pretty much everything is appropriate if it's handled in the right way.
If it's handled in the right way,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, this is one of the things I think is very important in children's theatre, and not everybody does it. But, you know, really interrogate the work. I think that's part of it. That could be another reason why so much theatre for young audiences is so tight and so full of integrity, because you have to be super careful. You know, there's people going to be coming at you from all sides. There's teachers, there's obviously there's parents, and you have to keep the kids happy. So you've got an awful lot of stuff to manage. And if you are especially then dealing with a heavy message like bereavement or death or sexuality or stuff, you know, you need to be really, really, really careful and think it through, and interrogate the work, interrogate. And that's how you get good work. I mean, I think the grown-up shows we've done with Moonfish, they got to a certain standard largely out of a funding model that wasn't really great, but it meant that we'd have, you know, there's a bit for now, there's a bit for later, and so all those bits in between the 2 or 3 weeks we had of development, we were still working. We were meeting up for dinner. Everybody was sort of just jotting down ideas when they had them. So it meant that even though the number of weeks might have been 10 or 12 in all, they were 10 or 12 weeks over a space of 2.5 years. And that really, really helps the process.
And I think even sometimes it's even good having the break in time.
Hugely, yeah.
You know, because it's going around in your head all the time, isn't it? I should say. And even things happen within those 2 years that you think, oh yeah.
Well, and even if you take a show back on the road after a year, Like you just go for a week to sort of get it back in the speech, and you go, why did we think of this though? But this is really obvious. Where was our brains? You know, we had a really lovely little thing happened with Star of the Sea when we were bringing it back the second time. Mairead, who was overseeing it because she wasn't acting, she went to Poland for a wedding for 2 days. And the rest of us in the room were actors without a director. So we just changed everything. What if we did this? Oh my God, yes, and so we were like bouncing around the room for these 2 days. And so Marie came back and she sort of sat there like this and looked at everything that had totally been changed. And she went, I see, yeah, no. No. And so we put everything back the way it was, but it's not a sad ending because all of that extra work that we had done completely deepened the feelings and the emotions that were bouncing around in the scene. Suddenly we were like much richer for having just gone crazy for 2 days, basically.
Well, and it's interesting because you're touching on two things, or you have been touching on two things, and this conversation has been touching on two things, which are so key to creating work, which is number one, long-term creative collaborative relationships, that you had the foundation and you had the vocabulary to navigate that whole transaction, both the day
and the openness, yeah.
Yeah. And then also what you've been touching on and what we've been touching on in this conversation is the length of time for the gestation of a piece of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Maria Callas said opening night is the beginning. Yeah. But opera rehearses quite short little tranches, but I share to my students all the time. Like, this is, you're never going to sing like her. Well, you might, but not under my hands. But it's what she does in between that you have to learn from. But yeah, an opera role is usually like that director or copywriter role production, and it will run for decades and grow.
It's something that I think is crucial to talk about, because I do think that this length of development, I think that people are being, small soapbox out for a moment, I think that people are being habituated to incredibly short runways for projects. Playwrights or creative collaborative groups are kind of under pressure to deliver
hugely
time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's especially cruel if the run is short as well, because, well, I suppose you have to really have a hit from day one, but shows definitely grow and improve once the audience is there, as we were saying earlier. Once, you know, there's always that feeling on the sort of the first night, you're going, that bit that I thought was funny, nobody laughed, and they all laughed at that bit. And every single production has that. That's where the exchange, everything moves, everything just gets shaken out. And then it grows in a whole new way.
Gary Hines says the best way to diagnose a production is doctor audience.
Doctor audience. Yeah.
And by the way, Pamela McQueen has kindly put into the chat, fellow dramaturg, the colleague of Tanya's, Pamela has put in the Coleridge full quote regarding suspension of disbelief, which is that willing suspension of disbelief for the moment, which constitutes poetic faith. Oh my God.
There's has it an Emily? What's the poet? Emily
Dickinson?
Thank you. There's a poem of hers that I love called To Make a Prairie, which I think is one of the best encapsulations of this kind of theatre. And apologies to poetry lovers if I butcher this, but it's to make a prairie, you need one clover and a bee, one clover and a bee and reverie. The reverie alone will do if bees are few.
That is wonderful.
And that's what that kind of poetic faith is. It's if you trust, and if you give trust to an audience, they will trust the production, and together you create.
Yeah. It's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And the simplest thing, yeah.
Sorry.
Aoife.
Absolutely
Wonderful.
Jesus. Yeah. And God, if that sounds like it could have described some of those beautiful children's, like it sounds like the motto of a children's theater company or a theater.
Yeah. Yeah. A clover and a bee and a reverie. It's beautiful.
Wow. We might stay with another piece which uses a relatively limited limited box of concrete tools, but uses a lot of tools of theater magic coming out of a performer and from an audience, which is The Man in the Woman's Shoes, which, Tanya, you also suggested this one, but possibly Morgan or Allison, one of you might have seen it.
I keep missing it.
I haven't actually. Yeah, I'm the same.
I'm actually scarred.
I've tried so many times.
Yeah.
It has, this show was recommended by Gay Byrne, so it will run forever. It's The Man in the Woman's Shoes has appropriately enough legs, so I have now seen it. I've seen it 3 times. I've seen it again in a heartbeat and around the country. There's a sequel called I Hear You and Rejoice, which is just the perfect encapsulation of the experience of these shows, and I've seen that one twice. And it is just, it's Aoife, you're right. It's just this perfect encapsulation of what we're talking about heart and faith and an affection and a respect and a joy in having an audience. And I was talking to my husband about this show recently, and I said, it's a one-man show. Michael Murphy has written and performs it based on, it was part of the Bealtaine Festival, I think, in 2012, 2013 maybe. And he talked to people who are part of active retirement groups, and he has this lovely idea where he says that artists like he and Pat Kinnivan are about, creating stories about the lives of gentle people, and that's what this is. And it's the dignity and respect and beauty and love of an older generation. And I told my husband that it genuinely makes me happy thinking about the existence of 2 of the characters, Pat Farnham, who's the main character, the Man in the Woman's Shoes, and Kitsy Rainey. And I said, I just get so happy knowing that they're out there, even though they're not, they're fictional, they don't exist, but genuinely the beauty and the tenderness of the story that he created and these characters and how dignified he makes them, even whilst they're funny. Just, it's one of those stories that you carry around in your heart, and it just makes the world a better place.
Yeah, he does, Michael Murphy, make the world a better place.
Yeah. Phenomenal.
He's a beast of just great, massive energy and warmth.
I first saw this in the Axis, and Michael Murphy is like a Cochrane performer. His physicality is extraordinary. Just the way he can create a world with like a twitch of the eyebrow, or create sound effects where you're like, there's a chicken on stage. I know I can't see it, but there is a chicken on stage. I will lay money on the fact that there's a chicken on stage. And like, this was a masterclass. This was virtuosic. This was something extraordinarily like skillful and special. And everyone watching it knew it. And I'm assuming he on stage knew it. And when he came out to the Access Bar afterwards, it was just this very quiet, slightly kind of shy, humble man who was just, everyone who was like, that was so amazing, thank you so much. He would just be so genuinely delighted and take time and talk to them. And it was just the soul of those shows and the soul of that performer are just beautiful.
Yeah.
Scott, Shanti O'Malley.
Hi, Sean.
He just wrote, and I think we can all agree with this, Michael Murphy is an absolute gem.
An absolute gem, a national treasure. Yeah.
We do have these remarkable performers who have made these careers or part of their careers with, and you mentioned Pat Kinnavan as well. And you know, there I would see in a slightly different form, Alwyn Fuere fits into this stream, and there are many others as well. But
Amy Conroy,
yeah, big time.
But these
great.
These performer creators who almost create this particular style, brand, kind of theater out of their souls, out of and also, but as you say, out of their bodies. People who are both gifted verbal storytellers, but also gifted physical storytellers. We have a couple. Brian O'Donoghue says both Murphy shows are spectacular. The second one has the best last line that has the greatest impact of any show I've seen.
Wow.
And Sean T follows up his very accurate description of Michael Murphy, and he says Michael Murphy is also extraordinary in a very different role in Loch na Halla.
John, Tata Eleva mentioned. He's reading my mind. I was going to mention Loch na Halla, but I hadn't sent it in, so I was like, well, maybe I won't because I didn't mention it. But when I heard Michael Murphy, I was like, oh my God, Loch na Halla. Because what everybody does in that show, I think it's one of the most important shows that's been on in a number of years. Because it's contemporary mythology. It basically mythologizes two of the biggest scandals to happen in County Longford in the last 50 years. And if you didn't know the stories that they're based on, it doesn't matter. It's still just mind-blowing, devastatingly emotional dance theatre.
Yet also ecstatic beauty.
Oh my God. The catharsis at the end. I don't know, have you seen it, Alison?
No, I haven't seen it, no.
Okay, I won't spoil it, but it's if it ever comes back, it's just beautiful. And I can't believe I'm saying this, it ruffled feathers.
Oh.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah, there were some local dignitaries who spotted the references and weren't happy.
Oh, okay.
It's just so beautiful.
A couple of venues, it's the kind of show you don't often see outside of a major kind of metropolis. Like this went to Sadler's Wells, this went to New York, this plays in the Dublin Theatre Festival. And a group of venues around the island saw it and said, like, I'm bringing that to my audiences. Like Patricia at Ungrianon brought it to Letterkenny, and that's where I saw it.
Yeah.
I was teaching at Ulster University, so we just packed students into a bus and brought them to see, and being able to see that level of just world-class performance that just left the audience gasping at the end.
Gasping, yeah.
Was just, what a gift. Like you could see that at Lincoln Center in New York any day, any time. Like that would proudly take a place there.
Oh yeah.
So just this level of Irish dance theatre that is for the ages.
Yes, and I think to tie into what you were saying about Michael, about Michael Murphy, because there's another Michael Cooke in Dublin, he made such an effort for it to be relatable to an audience and not, as the French would say, it doesn't fart hard in his arse. It's just telling you very clearly what it is, what it's telling you. It doesn't have any notions. It's just so limpidly clear. It's beautiful. Yeah.
And you know, just touching on some of the themes that we've been talking about, I'm actually just going to pull out my phone because I was listening to a podcast interview with Michael Keegan-Dolan.
Oh, wow.
Oh, highly recommend. Shout out on the pod. This is not a pod, but shout out on this kind of podcast for a really great podcast to check out, which is Sheem Satira's Sounds Like Folk podcast. Is amazing.
Okay.
And
check it out.
Yeah, a great mix of different.
Stick it in my phone.
Artists. But there was a quote that I was taking a walk in the park while I was listening to Michael Keegan-Dolan's interview, and he said this beautiful thing that I wrote in my phone about the process of creation, collaboration. He talks about massaging the unfolding.
Ooh. Ooh. Massaging the unfolding. I want my unfolding massaged.
I thought that's some words.
And that's such courage, though, because I think a lot of what Alison and Morgan and Aoife and myself have been talking about has been that kind of that faith in presenting something to an audience that's not explicit. That I'll often talk about a show and say, yeah, I enjoyed that, but that was a show that was afraid of subtext, that everything had to be spelled out. And the faith, particularly at the early stages of creation, of being like, maybe we don't need to like make this explicitly clear. Maybe we can leave this a little beautifully messy, or kind of hint at something and let the audience take what they will from it. That takes such bravery, because as Morgan and Alison both said, like, you don't know until the audience is there what will happen with that. It's such a gamble, but the courage of it is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I think ambiguity is a terrifying thing to portray in art, because you're not being clear. And I mean, I've been doing a lot of work on my acting just over lockdown. I've just done little courses and stuff, and sort of to discover that the human brain doesn't necessarily know what it's going to say, or the thought that it's about to express isn't necessarily like clear before it comes out of your mouth. So, you know, that space where I don't know why I just said that. There's no reason why I said that. Yeah, is a great wellspring, but very, very difficult.
And even, sorry, when Tanya was talking about the apple earlier on, I was just thinking, you know, in the creation, like, say in the case of Anu, like they make very direct offerings to the audience, and there's a big trust on their part that the audience is going to go with it, like, because I've seen earlier on, there was one performance, and it was actually Katrina Ennis was in it as well, and it was a good few years ago now, but it was part of the Fringe, and her character was having an argument in a hairdresser, and basically Katrina Ennis's character was saying she was going to take the stuff with her. You know, I think there wasn't enough money to pay her, so she was taking the stuff with her, and like, she had a hairdryer, and I was sitting in the audience, and she was like, "Here, will you take that? Bring it outside." Like, and
I love it.
And I was like, and I was so invested in it, and like the boss was sort of a nasty piece of work, and I was so invested in it. I was like, well, yeah, better, sort of thing. Like, so I went outside, and then I think it was in East Essex Street, you know, where GCN is in town, up around Parliament Street. And like, it was at a funny time as well. It was maybe like 11 in the morning, or, you know, it wasn't quite lunchtime, but there was a good few people around. And I was sitting there like with the hairdryer in my hand, and I was thinking, Jesus, like, I wonder how long do I wait here for? Will somebody come out and get the hairdryer? But yeah, like, it was a very, you know, they're very explicit in their, this is a gift, you can go with it, or, you know, so it really it's very exciting as an audience member. But it's sort of like, well, act now sort of thing, you know, make your decision.
Well, and Alison, you had mentioned another, because that was part of 13, right? Was that? Yeah,
I think that was part of 13. Yeah, I think it was.
You had mentioned the Jed Murray piece within that as well.
Yeah, he was in a phenomenal piece, and that was a one-man show, Inquiry, and it was in Dublin Castle, and the person I was with on the day, now I won't mention names, but she was quite hungover at the time. It was in a very, you know, enclosed space and very intimate, but like, it was so. Wow. It was a real. It wasn't a dance piece per se, but his physicality was so amazing.
Those pictures are amazing.
Yeah, it was really stunning, Morgan. Like, you know, like the cartoon Transformers years ago. You know, you'd see them. You know, they take these different steps, and then at the end, you know, you can't remember how they got there. But like that, it was like sort of watching someone transforming. You know, it was really, yeah. I actually nearly get goosebumps thinking about it. It was so powerful and good, and yeah, it was great. Like.
And
That
the
is
tickets for 13 sold out in seconds, so you must have been so quick off the mark for that. Well done. Salute.
What did 13 signify the number of people allowed in, or?
No, it was a reference to the lockout.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Jed was playing Jim Larkin.
Wow.
And you know the way, obviously, like Jim Larkin used the statue of O'Connell Street, and you know, so it's the presence and just the physicality was just great, and even so the use of the film in the background as well.
Yeah,
really worked well, because although it was Jed in the film, you still had that sense of, okay, this is history, and it was good.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
it's just extraordinary. And we have a comment from the audience, from Glenda. Glenda, my apologies if I mispronounce your name. It might be Chimino or Simino. Glenda says, Louise Lowe's work leaves remarkable space for audience participation, experiential involvement, and interpretation. That is beautifully put.
It is beautifully put.
Beautiful summation. And I'm struck by how many pieces that we've touched on this evening are bringing elements of music, of dance, of filmmaking, indeed, that these disciplines, the headspace, the technical requirements, both of the performers and possibly of technology or other mechanisms integrated into the piece, that's all coming in. And I wonder whether the conversation we're having around the process of creation, of collaboration, of what it means to perform, all of these pieces that we've touched on are informed by this multivalent kind of perspective that's at work within all of these. I find that very striking.
I think it's very important that elements collaborate fully. And I think in a way that the Lear training is going a long way in advancing that, because they've got a technical degree alongside the performing degree. I think that's really helpful. But, you know, because Moonfish doesn't have a director, very often, like Leon will be down to design, or Sarah Jane was designing lights, and they'd come down for a few days and they would be going, well, okay, what about this? And they'd start helping to direct a scene, which is just brilliant. And so there's such cohesion then, because if something has an ambitious design, it has to fit. It's crucial. If you're going to use multimedia videos or whatever, there needs to be a reason that it needs to fit.
And I'll just call out the full names of those two brilliant designers, Leon Bell and Sarah Jane Shields, because they and you know, two prime examples of real collaborator designers.
And Matt Burke designed the lights for Star of the Sea, and again, he was so often in the room. And then after he did Star of the Sea, he went and did an MFA in the Lear.
I think he did his in lighting and dramaturgy. So he's really thinking about how these elements integrate in storytelling and not just visual presentation.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's and I know we're creeping past 8 p.m. as we always tend to do. We won't go into this too far, but you know, there is a whole conversation, or perhaps multiple conversations, to be had about the nature of dramaturgy. Some folks watching might say, what is dramaturgy? And maybe I will put Tanya on the spot to answer that question very succinctly, as I know she can. But the question of the act of dramaturgy and how it's performed by a dramaturg, but also how is it performed by other members of a collaborative team. But before I go any further in my spiel, Tanya, for folks who might be scratching their heads, what is a dramaturg, or what is dramaturgy?
All right, so I'm going to answer both what is a dramaturg and what is dramaturgy by using one of my favorite analogies, which is the way I would, for me, and every dramaturg is different with what they bring to a production and what a production asks them to do. But for me, if actors and playwrights and designers are building a world, then the dramaturg is there as map maker. They're kind of bringing kind of ideas to help this exploration and say, oh, have you considered this? Or I thought that idea was fascinating. Can we go further and talk more about that? Or, oh, here there be dragons, be careful. And it is kind of cartography of the imagination. It is, how do you explore a world as richly and fully as possible with everyone's contributions? And dramaturgy, the thing, when you look at a play on stage, it's the world. It's how it works. It's how do all of those elements come together to create the self-contained little universe. And that is dramaturgy. So a dramaturg is a map maker, and dramaturgy is the world, the land, the thing on which we kind of seek to explore.
I think one doesn't have to know what dramaturgy is per se to know that if it's not there, it's not working.
Yeah. And
it's the balancing of it's like I think I love the map maker thing, or also I'm thinking a clockmaker. That's if what you're making is a clock, all the wheels have to sort of fit together in a way that's cohesive, and if one wheel is too big, this thing is not going to tell the time properly.
And just to stretch my analogy a little bit further, you know, a dramaturg is somebody who comes into a production being like, I'm excited to explore this. What can I bring? What ideas, what knowledge, what history, what research, what questions? But equally, everyone in that room is an explorer. So it's not a case of, well, if you don't have the map maker, you might as well not go on the journey. Everyone's bringing that sense of exploration. So we talked about how Matt Burke, as a lighting designer, is also a dramaturg. He's bringing that exploration of story. The way, Morgan, that you talked about the kind of process of Starfish is that everyone is dramaturg and director and is bringing that kind of, that fascination to kind of color in and create and discover a world.
Yeah, and to open the door to it. It's so important. I think dramaturgs, I hope you have a guild.
Actually, Pamela McQueen, who chimed in perfectly with knowledge, being the perfect example of a dramaturg. She and Hannah Slatna set up Dramaturgs Network Ireland just for that purpose, to have a space for people who work in dramaturgy in different kind of aspects across the country to come together to talk about this. So of course, Pamela McQueen is like, they don't know who that quote's from. I will find it. I will find the knowledge. There is the knowledge.
Dramaturging our live stream. And Pamela, I do hope that you will drop a link to that into the chat, so that anyone who's interested in finding out more will head on over to the website.
Dramaturgs Network Ireland. Get your finest dramaturgs here.
Well, listen, I mean, partially, you know, as I always find myself saying at around this time each Wednesday evening, I could do this forever, and I would love to sit and talk to the three of you for the next few hours. But I am aware that other things demand your attention and your time. So I might wrap up the conversation here. I think we've had some wonderful meditation and conversation about some really deep and crucial elements of You're not saying hello for us, Morgan.
They say hello and they say happy birthday as well. I told them.
But we're talking about some of the most vital elements of this work that we do, and work that we see and we love and we remember for years to come.
Yeah.
It was lovely to be reminded of, I think in a year that's been so hard, it's lovely to be reminded of just the joy of this.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to get back into
celebrate
the theatre. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. That was most vivifying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Giving me life. Really enjoyed that.
Whoever is out there, thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for dropping in. Slán gach duine.
Slán. Thank you, Morgan.